My name is Marie Keister, and welcome you to the meeting tonight. We're actually participating in an existing BSAP meeting, so thank you for letting us come and share what we've heard from a series of public meetings and more to come. So with more about why we're here, I will turn it over to Steve Shoney.
Thank you, Marie. For those of you who don't know me or I haven't had a chance to meet, my name is Steve Shoney. I'm the city manager. As Marie said, this is the first of us, or not the first. This is kind of, let's call it the end of the first third of the process or beginning of the second third of the process, however you want to put it, as we go through this idea of looking at the area off of Arlington Center Boulevard, north of the lakes, and really figure out how we make that a vibrant part of our city again. So I think most folks those who've answered or responded in the chat, I think it's a little bit on both sides of those who've been through one of our earlier meetings and those who haven't. So we'll go back and cover a little bit of why we're here and what we're doing. But most important for us, we're at the stage now where we want to share kind of our evolution of ideas, get some feedback from you guys, and continue evolving what we're working on. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Chad Gibson, who's the director of our community development department, which includes our planning team. And I'm going to let Chad take it away.
And Chad, I'm gonna jump in on you and usurp you a little. No problem at all. Thank you, Steve. That teed us up well. And just want to point out we have several people standing by to answer your questions. Chad Gibson is going to give the bulk of the presentation, but as you'll see in just a second, as I explain the format, this will be a give and take. But Chad, Community Development Director, is going to be giving an overview. Jackie Thiel, Assistant City Manager, is also going to weigh in with some comments related to traffic. And then we have Joe Henderson, the Economic Development Director, also available to us. Emma Spite, who is our Community Affairs Director, and Justin Neelam, Senior Planner. So you've got a whole, and actually I just missed, I think, another member of the planning team. So this group is working really hard to be responsive to your input and making sure that what is proposed reflects what we've heard so far. So what we're going to do tonight is we are continuing a process of seeking input on possible zoning rules for future redevelopment. And we've already had 2 meetings with the public, one in person and one online. And we want to share what we've heard so far. And then as we go along, there may be questions that the members may have. So we'll want to be able to address those. If you are watching online, there is an opportunity to raise your hand if you have a question or comment. And then, just in general, our rules to the public have been be courteous, be kind, and concise. So we want to respect everybody's time and wrap this up within a reasonable amount of time. So since we got started, there has been quite a bit of engagement that I just already mentioned. But on slide 4, you will see that we have sent letters, we've blogged. Emma has made sure that every communication channel that Upper Arlington has, she's used to share the news about these opportunities to provide input. So there have been these 2 public meetings. There was also a survey that people could fill out online that's also been promoted. We're introducing what we've learned tonight, and then we'll have 2 more opportunities for public input solely about this. And then that recommendation vote is expected to take place at the BSAP meeting on October 19th. But wait, there's more. There are still city council meetings that you can also speak at as well and share your thoughts. So now I'm ready to turn it over to Chad to explain what we've heard and what we're proposing.
Okay, thanks, Marie. Good evening, everybody. My name is Chad Gibson, and thanks for your time on this beautiful Monday night. I know some of you have heard some of this information before, so I will be concise in my description. We can always go back if you have questions, but the area of town that we're looking at is on this map. It's in blue. It's a 34-acre part of town. It's got frontage on Henderson Road, Arlington Center Boulevard, North Bank Drive, roughly 13 parcels, over 450,000 square feet of existing office, and it's currently zoned office and research district. Some of the existing businesses that are located in this area you're probably familiar with, from National Church Residences to Hamilton Capital, among many others. And just some select site photos just to give you an idea of what part of town we're talking about. As I mentioned, National Church Residences, Hamilton Capital, Columbus Aesthetic and Plastic Surgery, and Goshen Enterprises, going from, I guess, clockwise from top left. So why are we here tonight, and what do we have to keep in the front of our minds as we're talking about this proposal? Large office complexes, standalone office complexes, are not necessarily the goal moving forward. And what we're seeing is a market that is leaning more towards mixed use developments rather than standalone offices. It's fairly rare to see a new standalone office complex built unless there are some extremely special circumstances, such as, you know, freeway interchange frontage, that sort of visibility or special circumstances. So what the concept of this effort is to make sure that our zoning code aligns with those market conditions, and so that we have a viable piece of commercial property moving forward into the future. And one thing that we want to be extremely transparent about is we know that National Church Residences and Goshen Enterprises are considering improvements to their properties. Right now, Goshen already has a multi-million-dollar internal interior renovation underway. So we know these sorts of improvements are on the way. We don't have anything formal that's been submitted, but this effort is timely, and so that's important to keep in mind.
Hey, Chad, can I interrupt you for 1 second?
Sure.
Can you change the format of the presentation?
Yeah,
I know that
looking
you've been
here.
trying there, just so that when we get to
Trying.
these maps, people at home can see.
Yeah, I'm gonna give it a shot here. I've been trying to mess around with it.
Chad, I think if you go to the top and do view options, just do whatever you're not doing now. Just click the other switch and it should switch.
How about that?
There you go.
I did it. Thanks, Chad.
Very good. Absolutely. Thanks for doing that. I was trying all sorts of options and did all of them except for that one. Well, thank you, and for your patience on that. In terms of, again, why we're here tonight, City Manager Shoney mentioned it. We want to have a vibrant office district that supports our wonderful, attractive community that is Upper Arlington. So our general ideas on this are, you know, can we allow mixed use rather than a single use zoning category? Can we adjust the existing zoning standards to align with what we think are the direction of the market? Is this a new designation, which could be the planned mixed office district? And then figure out how the redevelopment potential relates to the surrounding land uses, such as the neighborhood to the south. And most importantly, we want to understand what your priorities are. We've already heard quite a bit of feedback, which we will summarize, but some of you obviously are new to this process, and we want to hear from you as well. Now, you're going to see some numbers like office density and residential density later in the proposal, and we want you to have an idea of what those numbers mean if you're not in development. And so we have identified 3 fairly recent developments in Central Ohio, which we can sort of look at as a benchmark for different sorts of density. So for example, Grandview Crossing, which is across Riverside Drive from Sheets down near Grandview Avenue. It's a fairly low office density of 4,500 square feet per acre. This site was compromised with a unregulated landfill. And so they were, both Columbus and Grandview were limited on density. So the residential density is roughly 24 units per acre. And that project's still under construction if you've been by there lately. Next, in the middle of the screen is Grandview Yard. This is the former Penn Traffic Big Bear Warehouse site down near Grandview and 3rd Avenue. a little higher density here, roughly 9,600 square feet of office per acre. And you might know restaurants there such as Hofbrauhaus. The overall site's about 125 acres, and the residential density is significantly higher than what we're considering here at 120 units per acre. And as you can see from that elevation, you have different uses in different buildings. Sometimes you'll have retail on the first floor, office above. Sometimes it's all office. Sometimes it's multifamily. So there are a variety of building formats with a mix of uses in that regard. Finally, on the right is Bridge Park in Dublin. Significantly higher office density than you'll see what we're considering at 24,000 square feet per acre. That project's roughly 25 acres, and as far as a residential density, it's roughly 39 units per acre. So that's an important slide for really comparators for what we're considering here and what we've heard from stakeholders. Another issue that we want to share with you is building height and what the context is for the heights that are being proposed. What's important to note is the existing maximum height for this district is 76 feet. And that's right in line with the Hamilton Capitol building along Henderson Road, which is 74 feet. That building is a 5-story building with a sort of a larger parapet, but that's what the current zoning allows for that entire blue area. So that's an important benchmark to understand and think about. Some of the other buildings around town, the new Columbus Aesthetic and Plastic Surgery building is only 2 stories. It's roughly 32 feet tall. So you get an idea, a sense of what those building heights are.
Hey, Chad.
Yes.
So I want to kind of bring the folks along who this may be their first time seeing and processing this. And so what we're doing here is we want, Chad's walking through exactly what people saw before, but in our last meetings, we asked people, what are your thoughts? Should we keep the same? Should we go higher? Should we have a transition between areas? And so Chad is about to show you where we landed based on that feedback, but some of you haven't had a chance to weigh in yet. So once we get to the next slide that shows, well, based on what we're hearing so far, and Chad will walk us through that, but then we'll stop Chad and we'll wait and hear your thoughts as well. So don't worry, you'll have opportunity to weigh in.
Thanks, Marie. So one of the things we've heard so far is that we want that the residents wanted a transition of building height. And so keeping taller buildings closer to Henderson Road rather than along that southern property line. So this map is a draft that sort of encapsulates what we've heard. And so keep the existing maximum building height of 76 feet as you're closer to Henderson Road in the darker purple. And then along the south property line near the lakes and along the west property line along the residential, there's going to be a 64 feet maximum building height. That's the input we've received so far. So that map shows you what areas you can have a taller building and what area you can have a little bit of a shorter building.
So why don't we stop there just a second and see if anybody wants to raise their hand. I'm watching to see if you're raising your hand so we can call on you.
Hey, Marie, why don't we go through the next couple, because I think if we stop here, there'll be a little bit of confusion in terms of some of the other limitations on height.
That sounds good. Yep.
Okay.
So stand by with your questions and comments.
Okay. So a lot of the comments that we heard in our previous meetings were about the lakes. The lakes are very important. They provide this sort of natural buffer and demarcation between the residential and the office developments that you see on this slide. So in terms of setbacks, what's appropriate? We know that there's a 25-foot easement on the north side of the lakes where you can't build anything. And so that sort of is a built-in buffer, but this is another consideration that we want you to give us input on. And, what are appropriate setbacks, and what are those building heights? What should those be in this area? And even uses, what uses could be added into the mix that are either desirable or undesirable for this area of town? Now, the next slide, this is also a draft of a potential setback map. So the areas in yellow, you would not be allowed to have any building within that part of the map. So starting on the south side along the lakes, there's a 40-foot building setback. And then on top of that, there's a 25-foot easement that runs along the north shore of the lakes for maintenance, et cetera. But that's those are areas per the plat that you can't build any buildings. So the yellow areas on this map, you couldn't have any building. So that's an important thing. Along the park to the west is a 0 setback, meaning buildings could be built up to that thin black line that you see running diagonally there. And then up toward Henderson Road, there's a 40-foot side yard setback to essentially protect the folks along Stonehaven and Chevy Chase. And then to the east, a 25-foot setback as you're adjacent to uses like City Barbecue and some of the condominiums that you see along Durker. So those are some very important maps, and again, based upon all the feedback that we've received so far.
How about we do one more slide,
Yeah.
and talk about the traffic considerations.
Yep, so at our previous meeting, we showed this slide and just showed a summary of traffic counts that we went out and got. And that generated a lot of conversation and a lot of questions on why we did that. And it was truly just because we know that Arlington Center Boulevard has 2 uses as it stands today. So you see how Arlington Center, the north side of it, before you get to the ponds, is commercial use, office use. And then south of the ponds, it's strictly residential. So we just wanted to get an idea of how many people are using it for the residential, with the caveat that there is the storage units south of that. So you see, Henderson Road seats about 18,000 vehicles a day. And then there's 210 people going in and out of the pond area with about 80 vehicles a day using those storage units. And from our last meeting, we did get a lot of feedback on why we did that. And, some people thought, well, do you have to change it? And that's not our intent. We don't need to change anything here. We just wanted to have an open conversation with people that lived here. And some of the things we heard were that we could consider closing off Arlington Center Boulevard at the ponds. To do that, you still have to have access to the residential area, Hartlow and Sandstone, and the storage units. So we'd have to figure out how to connect that. But that's just something that we don't necessarily have to look at with the zoning, but could be a long-term consideration as people look at this area.
All right. Anybody have any comments before Chad is going to do a summary slide of what all we've heard, and then he'll summarize what the proposed zoning changes are. So okay, I see a hand. Let me just track you down a little bit. Betty. So let's see. Betty, can we unmute? Can you unmute yourself, or do we need to do it for you?
She should be able to talk now.
Now I can.
Yes.
Hi, my name's Betty Madsen. I live in Concord Village. And what I'm wondering about is if you shut off Arlington Center Boulevard at the lakes, are you picturing, as I'm looking at your map right now, that everything would then be over on Concord Village Drive?
So
That's a lot of traffic.
So, you're looking at the people that live in the neighborhood that, loops around there just south of the ponds, and then the storage unit. So those people would still have to have access somehow, and that connection would have to be on Concord Village Drive somewhere. But we're not proposing that we have to do that. It's just something that came up at the last meeting that people asked about.
I guess my thought is, I don't see, looking at the map, if you close that other off, that there's any other place to put a road. I mean, it looks to me, and I mean, you can't even extend the one down by the public storage unit.
Yeah, there would have to be a connection to Concord Village Drive at Arlington Center Boulevard made. There's no connection today. You're right.
I mean, if it was all residential, that's one thing, but it just seems to me that that's going to change that whole area. Right now, it's kind of and it changes the property values and everything for people on that side for that reason. And also just, the congestion as well as, what's going to happen on the other side of the lakes.
Right. Yep. And that's why we're not proposing that we do that with this project. It was just conversation that came up last time that we wanted to address.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Thanks, Betty. How about Elaine? Elaine, I think you can unmute yourself. Brenneman?
Talking is permitted.
Elaine, I think you're off mute. Can you share what your question or comment is? Oh, now you're back on mute.
Hmm.
All right, Elaine, I'm still. Now you're off mute. We should be able to hear you. You want to say hello? Okay, we're not hearing you. You know what, Elaine, you could try posting your question in the Q&A box if we don't have sound on your side, and I can watch for it and then I can share that. All right, I'm going to watch for that in the Q&A box. And in the meantime, does anybody else have any other comments? Lisa. Lisa, I see you're still on mute. Can you unmute yourself? Or Emma, unmute you?
Oh.
No, I'm not hearing from Lisa. Hello?
The joys of technology.
Okay, well,
We have your.
so, all right, so Jane asked, if residential housing is planned, it would be, she comments, it would be preferable to have them be owner occupied units or senior housing if developed by National Church residences and not rental properties. So Jane, I'm gonna just acknowledge you. Thank you for your comment so that others can see it as well. And Chad?
Would it help if I tried to promote Lisa and Elaine to panelists temporarily?
Let's give that a try. And then meanwhile, and Ed also has a question or comment.
Okay, so let's try. Learn to talk. Feel like the Wizard of Oz.
All right, can you hear me?
Yes, yes. Is that Ed?
Yes, it is Ed.
And just say it's Ed and Lisa.
Oh, it's Ed and Lisa. Lisa, the one that couldn't get through on her phone. I've got an iPad. Basically, the issue that we're going to have is, and I wish I could put my camera on because I'm in my backyard right now. We're on the end of Chevy Chase, and we're backing up directly to where you're talking about. And the idea that just beyond the tree line of our idyllic bucolic residence, we're going to have a 4-story building that is going to block our entire view of everything is just absolutely unacceptable.
And have high density housing.
And then the high
Combined
density
with
housing, packing up the park, and the loudness issues. These kinds of mixed use occupations, it would be essentially going back to downtown Chicago where we moved from to come here.
Okay, we appreciate that comment, Ed and Lisa. How about, let's see, so we've heard from Ed and Lisa and Betty. Was there somebody else that wanted to make a comment?
Can you hear us?
Yes, Elaine.
Can you hear us?
Is that Elaine?
Hello?
I can hear someone speaking. Can you hear me?
Yes. Okay. Mark's going to speak. He's my husband.
And is this the Brenneman
Yes,
family?
it is.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for putting this on. I attended the meeting on the in-person meeting, and I did listen to the other Zoom today, and I had a few questions because we looked at national church residences. It was mentioned in one of them that there was a chance of doing maybe a building with people living in it. And so I did a little research, and we actually went around to a few of their properties because we didn't realize that there was 36 properties in Franklin County, of which 30 of them are mixed use, are basically with people 55 and older. And so that kind of surprises because that wasn't senior housing. And we were just concerned that that there was going to be maybe another 100 people living there. And we've had experience in the past where we've had, when they put in the nightclub, we had people coming through the neighborhood and car chases. And we know that if another 100 people, there'll be a great number of people walking around like people normally do. That also obviously would impact the park greatly too. And we know that out of the 36, 31 of them are income-based too. So that was kind of interesting. We didn't know what experience Steve had and Chad had with national church residences, and if they were going to put in a campus of some sort, what that would involve.
A couple things. I do have some experience with National Church from, obviously they're a great employer here, and I have experience with them from my kind of prior positions. They do a mix of things. They actually have another facility here in Upper Arlington now at the other end of the city with National Church First Community Village. First Community Village is one of their properties. They have a reputation as being one of the best operators of senior living facilities in the country as a not-for-profit provider on that. So my experience there has been good. I did want to come back to, I think it was Edward's comment, Ed or Edward's comment. I can't remember whether he went by Ed or Edward. Just one point of clarification. The zoning that exists today would allow, and Chad, correct me where I go wrong on this, would allow a 72-foot building within 40 feet of the property line as the zoning stands today. So just one point of clarification in terms of what the current state is versus what might happen in the future as well.
Can I say something?
Lisa? Yes?
This is Elaine.
Oh, Elaine. Elaine.
Okay. First of all, as a small community, we live in Concord Village. We've been back here for 40 years. And we are concerned for not only the community as a whole, but for the people that live on the lake. Currently, the building, especially on the west side of the West Lake, is pretty low profile. So it is about a 2-story building at this point, and it's kind of built into the ground. So like I said, it's a low profile. What you're asking those people to do on that side is to have a building that is much taller, that houses people, anywhere from 75 to, maybe 150 units looking over their property. It takes away from their privacy. Not only that, but right now it's a 9 to 5, 5 day a week. You're asking for a 24/7. That's a lot. And that's going to not only impact their privacy, it's going to impact their property values. So that's number one. Number two is First Community isn't income based. So right now we don't know what they're proposing. So until something is proposed, I'm not really sure we should be rezoning at this point. I think we need to figure out what's going on and discuss it and work it out, and then figure out what to do from there.
Great, thank you, Elaine. So Chad, and then I'm going to get to you, Liz. Chad and our other folks, do you want to add any comments or address any of the comments that have been raised so far?
Yeah, I'm happy to start. Obviously appreciate the comments, and these are not unlike some of the comments we've heard previously. What we're trying to do here is be proactive and make the zoning more protective of the residents in advance of any development proposal that would come through the zoning board in a public forum. So the setbacks that you're seeing, the heights that you're seeing, those are all, they're obviously drafts, but those are actually an enhancement as compared to what's there today. So lower buildings near the lakes and greater setbacks along both the lakes and the residential uses to the west. So again, we're trying to be proactive and anticipate these changes rather than wait back and potentially see a rezoning application or an application with a lot of variances.
What do you expect? I mean, are you looking for a building height higher than what's currently there right on the lakes, where the old Berwanger and Overmeyer building was, and the one next door to it that the National Church residents own? Because right now it's 2 stories and it's built into the ground, so it's fairly low. You're talking about 64 feet. That's a lot.
Yeah, and what they could do by right currently is 76. So we know those 2-story buildings aren't going to be there forever. And so we're trying to get ahead of this by, having some sort of a height transition from the residential uses to the south as you get closer to Henderson Road. And so the map that I think you're still seeing does afford some height, but less than what they could do today.
Chad, let me step back a minute, because I think one of the things that we didn't talk about at the introduction was kind of the fundamental problem we're dealing with. And that is that office developments like this are failing everywhere. And this one, if we look into the future and we say, what is the viability that we're going to have buildings that have reached the end of their useful life and are really not very attractive in the modern office environment, where you need to have one of 2 things, if not both, which is really good access to highways or mass transit, or be part of a mixed use development. What is the chance that we'll see the kind of investment in these properties that we think is necessary for Upper Arlington? The chance of that is pretty low. And so we have to plan to do something. And so that's part of what we're exploring. So, we are facing the reality of these properties are not going to stay the same. Several of the National Church buildings are vacant already. And vacancy of buildings is what does lead to serious declines in property values and things like that. So the fundamental problem that we're trying to solve is recognizing that these properties need to stay viable for 2 things. One is the livability of the neighborhoods that surround them. And 2, this is an important revenue generating location for the city. Office is what pays for the cops and the firefighters and the parks and all that stuff. So needing to kind of keep this as a viable place where you have a base of office is really fundamentally what's driving us on this. So I didn't do a good enough job of kind of starting on that. And I think some of the comments kind of made me think that it would be helpful to do a little bit of that reset.
Mark's going to say something, but I have one question.
Well, hold your thought. Okay, Elaine, I need to get to Liz, then Carl and Chris, I think it is, Paula, Nick, and then I'll come back to Elaine and Mark. So Liz, you've been patient.
No problem. Thank you so much for creating this space for all of us. And I really appreciate over the last few months as I've started to learn more about housing and things like that. I appreciate the city being much more proactive like we are right now in defining before we get proposals that we have to react to, because this sets our bar, right? And that way developers come and look and understand what our bar is versus them kind of writing whatever they want and us having to kind of negotiate from there. I think this puts us in a much better position as a community to be able to say, this is where we are, you take it or leave it, right? For lack of a better way to put it. I also appreciate wanting to get this space occupied. I think, Steve, like you said, empty buildings are not good for any of us. They're not good for the community on a variety of levels. From a safety perspective, from a financial perspective, I think that makes a lot of sense to me. I'd say this, right? I think maybe part of the challenge that could be out there is that I am not always the best at translating spatially into some of what this looks like. And I wonder if there's a way as we continue down this process to get a couple renderings of some of these maps where they are more of like an eyeline type of view from some of these portions of the residential areas that are particularly those that are close. And it might help us better understand what exactly does this do to the sightline from someone's backyard? And what is that actually going to mean and look like? And that might help just kind of get a better sense of here's where we are today. This is what could happen versus, if we want to put some of these setbacks in, this is how it could actually improve that, to kind of do the before and after comparison. But again, appreciate having come to some of the meetings for this particular process already. Just appreciate the proactivity and the forethought in this. And the other thing that I just want to lead with, as a North Arlington resident, I think most of the literature that I've read has indicated that when we put in mixed use developments, it actually helps property values go up. So again, really, really appreciate the forethought and how we do this intentionally and thoughtfully, so that we can all benefit from that type of development. Thank you.
Thank you, Liz. Now I want to go to Carl and Chris. Carl, are you able, and Chris, are you able to talk?
Chris? Hi, we're here. Can you hear us?
Yes, we can. Great.
Great. Okay. Well, we live up along Henderson Road in the villas at Slate Run. And the biggest detriment to living here is Henderson Road noise and traffic and congestion. So anything that happens across the street in that whole area is going to just add to that. So we have no interest in this development. And so as far as we're concerned, we would just prefer everything stayed exactly the same way it is or less. That's simple. I don't know what anybody, obviously people who live elsewhere, that's our problem, not theirs. So anyway, that's our 2 cents.
I appreciate that, Carl. Every comment is one we want to hear. So thank you. Paula.
And if I can also add, from where we are in, like you said, in the villas at Slate Run, and getting out onto Henderson Road is not the safest thing that you can do, because just beyond where Stonehaven goes out onto Henderson, if you're going west, there's a turn and a downhill, and you cannot see traffic coming. And if we start adding a whole lot of traffic onto Henderson, I can't see that that's going to get any better. And I think it's going to get a lot worse.
Thank you, Chris. And I think you can all see that we're taking copious notes to all your comments. So we appreciate your input. Okay, Paula, you're up next. Paula, can we help you get off mute? Paula's still on mute. Oh. Okay, while we wait on those technical issues, how about Nick? You're next.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
I forgot to change the name. This is actually Lisa that was trying to get on earlier.
Okay,
I
Nick
got
and Lisa. All right.
I got into my iPad now, but there were, and my husband did speak, but there were a couple more points that I wanted to make and just comments that I wanted to make. So we are at 4856 Chevy Chase, where, you know, our yard is adjacent to, you know, the area that you're talking about here. So we would be, you know, very much potentially affected. I guess one point I wanted to make with regard to the current maximum building height of 76, and one of the gentlemen there made the point that that's the current, you know, these property owners could theoretically build a building that tall now. I understand that. I didn't know that before, but what I guess concerns me is the combination of the fact that that is the current building allowable building height right behind our property, and combine that with the fact that you're proposing changing it to a mixed use development that would allow, as the point that someone else made, 24/7 increased presence of lots more people and lots more traffic and lots more noise. I can't really imagine even a 64-foot building being right there 25 feet potentially from our yard. That just doesn't seem like it fits in with the characteristics of the neighborhood, which much of it is single family homes. To me, that doesn't sit well at all. I feel like, I know someone made the comment that it would increase property values. I don't see that happening at all. Like, I would see absolutely the potential for it to decrease property values for the really immediately surrounding homeowners, and that concerns us a lot. I feel like the general feeling in the home buying community is that people don't want to buy a house that's close to an apartment building. So we have some pretty significant concerns about these plans and these changes. I guess I can't quite imagine a building higher than 2 to 3 stories under those circumstances being either in the only parcels where I could imagine the 4 and 5 story buildings being potentially appropriate are the ones right along Henderson Road. The ones that are further back in the neighborhoods, to me, it does not seem appropriate to put an apartment. Potentially, it's going to be mostly apartments, I would assume, that's taller than 2 to 3 stories that are just really adjacent to people's single family homes. That seems like a pretty big detraction from the neighborhood for the current homeowners. So we have a lot of concerns about, you know, the combination of the high density housing and the potentially taller buildings than what are existing right now, so close to our house.
Thank you, Lisa. I want to make sure others have a chance. So Paula, I want to give you a chance to try to weigh back in, and then I'm going to go to Marsh, and I promise to get back to Elaine too. Ed,
Hello?
one second, Elaine.
No, wait a second. It's about Paula. Paula can you put her on a panel? Because she can't speak to you.
Paula, Emma, is she already?
We able to get through?
Timing.
Timing.
Stand by. Emma, is she a panelist?
She should be. I keep saying promote to panelist.
See here, I raised my hand.
Yeah.
Oh, we hear you.
I'm currently on mute.
Okay.
Oh, no, I hear somebody. Is that Paula speaking? Did I just hear Paula say she was on mute, even though we could hear her?
Yeah.
I'm hearing you.
I'm supposed to be.
Oh, now we hit a mute button.
Let's try it again.
Okay, so I'm looking for Paula out there. Paula, we're not hearing you. As we wait on Paula another minute, Ed, I want to make sure, as of right now, I'm planning to get back to you. Did I just hear Paula? Okay, while we're waiting for Paula, I want to go to Marsh. And then Elaine, and then Ed.
Okay, Marsh should be able to
Hi
speak.
there, this is Marsh. I'm just curious about the possibility of increasing the setbacks on the west side. That's obviously where a lot of the single-family residences are that people are talking about and concerned about. Has that been discussed? What's the process of evaluating that on the overall design?
Chad, you want to?
Sure. So the 40-foot setback that's shown on this draft setback map is an increase, an upgrade to what's there now. You can see the existing building. Certainly adding to that number is something we can consider. When we're looking at these parcels, we have to be careful that we don't take away too much, so it's striking that balance. But from what I can see, there is a potential to add some additional feet to that setback. But what's proposed now is greater than the setback that's in place.
But the net effect we have right now with the ground that's there, so if I'm looking at just, I realize this may not be exact to scale, but we've probably got 60 feet of ground there, and then we have an enormous parking area before we get to the building immediately to the east of us.
Mhm.
And so that really negates the impact of that building by putting it so far away from the property. Even if we could look at much lower building height along that western side to scale it over to the area on Arlington Center or something, that might be interesting. The other thing I do want to point out, and I know that we've got a jurisdictional issue here between Upper Arlington and Columbus, but as Carlin Priss, I think, said, the exit from Stonehaven onto Henderson is incredibly dangerous, particularly if you're trying to make a left turn from Stonehaven. It's just not practical at certain times of day. And so I think we do have to talk about some way to mitigate that traffic for egress out of Stonehaven if this goes forward, and make doubly sure we don't have any egress from Arlington onto Stonehaven, from Arlington Center Drive onto Stonehaven if this goes through. The traffic is the single biggest issue. And it's becoming more of it's obviously an inconvenience, but I think it's actually starting to move more toward a danger.
One comment, and I saw the comment in the questions to that effect, and I don't know whether this makes you feel better or worse, but I hadn't even thought about that as a potential, and the kind of idea of having somebody cut through that lot, through that parcel to Stonehaven. That is not something that I can see where we would, I just can't see us ever supporting that. But thank you for flagging that, because I hadn't even thought about that as being a concern. But now that you say it, I can see why you would have that concern.
I appreciate it.
Dive in a little bit more to something Chad just said. Part of the art of doing rezonings like this is we do have to be careful of something called a taking, which is where we by regulation, we come in and we take someone's property rights away from them. We have to be really careful about that. So when we start talking about reducing heights from what it is, it's just something we have to be really careful of, because we don't want to go in and do something and then have somebody sue us and throw it out in court.
We understand that completely.
Yeah, and I appreciate that. It's one of the things that we're having to go through as we try and figure out what is the right approach here, or what's the right balancing of things that we're trying to do.
Well, and I think and I'll make one more comment and then I'll shut up. But the concern here is obviously you've got people who moved to this area because of the property values and because of the general real estate and the aesthetic of the neighborhood and everything else. And I realize that's very difficult to balance, but that's obviously the concern of those of us who live here, is that we not find a diminution in our property value or in our quality of life because this area is put adjacent to our properties.
Yeah, we appreciate that, Marsh. And I want to note that Harold Williams and Bob Tenenbaum also are Stonehaven residents, and just want to go on record of saying any proposed buildings that are higher than 2 stories or any high traffic noise generating businesses should be restricted to Henderson Road. Those are their comments. And then I'm just going to throw in here, Liz wrote, as part of these changes, could we also look at proactively addressing traffic moving on and off Henderson Road? So, you know, I think this safety concern, I think, has been very illuminating. So I appreciate that. Paula, you are off mute.
I think so.
Yes. All right.
I'm so sorry.
No, that's okay. We were
I came in the meeting kind of late. I'm not real computer when it comes to Zoom. So I don't know what you discussed before the first 15 minutes, but I guess I'm more, I mean, I know there's going to be change, and I guess I'm more concerned what is going to go in there. Is it going to be apartments? I know National Church, they specialize in Section 8 housing and HUD. And I'm not trying to be mean or anything. I know up on Durker, north of Henderson, there is, I mean, there's pedophiles that live up there. There's Section 8 that is up there, and that concerns me. You know, what is National Church if they're going to build residents? What kind of residents? Is there going to be another First Community? Which would be great, but I'm just really concerned on what they're planning on building.
So our zoning regulations don't tell people what you can charge for your property. So as part of the zoning part, we don't get into saying you can charge this or you can't charge that as it stands today. And there are some places that do that in terms of saying you can only charge so much. I don't actually know of anybody, and I don't even know if it's legal to say you have to charge at least this amount. I think my guess is that's illegal, like that you can only charge this amount and above.
Right.
So from a zoning perspective, we don't know. We're not asking the question from a zoning perspective. We're not answering, we won't ask the question from a regulatory perspective because that's not something that the city of Upper Arlington has adopted as a policy at this point. There are lots of folks who are starting to talk about that. I will say that. But this is not something that when we get into zoning, we deal with what the rent is going to be on an apartment.
Okay. All right. And just because I've lived here all my life, I'm 63 years old. I guess Henderson Road has changed a lot. I'm half scared going up to Kroger's now at night. I mean, I'm not trying to be, mean or anything, but sometimes I'm scared. And I guess I worry about what they're going to put, in that area.
The other thing I will say, as you talk about safety, and there are pluses and minuses to everything. One of the pluses that we have seen in Upper Arlington of places where we put in more density is that crime actually goes down. Where you put in residential housing because you have more eyeballs and you have more activity. And so less people who are there to do bad things are more worried about getting caught because our police can't be everywhere at all times. Except for when you forgot to have your license plate renewed, then it feels like they're always right there behind you. And so, it is something to consider, but, longer term, we hope that this is the first step in a process that gets us looking at the entirety of the Henderson Road corridor along with the city of Columbus, because there's a lot of potential there that's going unrealized. And the downside of potential is that there's some challenges there that need to be addressed. So we are kind of, this is, the first step of us thinking about, okay, what do we learn from this area? How do we use that to revitalize further to the east on Henderson Road?
All right, so while you think about that, Paula, I'm gonna go back to Elaine and then Ed, and then I think Lisa/Nick may still be interested in saying something again as well. So Elaine?
Actually, it's Mark, Elaine's husband.
Okay.
Here's the question I have. It seems this thing is moving very quickly. And I don't understand that. Number one, something of this significance. On the first Zoom call, Steve, you said that you come out and talk to groups. Well, the Concord Village Association is made up of everyone that lives on both sides of the lake. And I would propose that maybe a meeting with that group would be good, because there's the first meeting we went to in City Hall, only the people on the lake had gotten a letter. And since then, the word has gotten around, and there are a lot of people who are very interested. And I think a meeting like that would help get a lot of this stuff out, a lot of explanations, and we could probably move forward faster in that regard if we had that meeting.
Okay.
So I'll talk to the president of the association and see how that could be put together, because we could have it done. There's a lot of places we've had the meetings in the past, and I'll let him know that that's and have him contact you if that's appropriate.
Yeah, who is that? Is that Chris?
Chris McGovern.
Chris McGovern.
Okay, yeah, just have Chris reach out to me.
Okay, and it's just I think all of us, none of us want us to go from where we are to a worse spot, and everyone understands progress. Everyone knows that the city has budgets and that we live in a great community with excellent services, and that to maintain that, changes have to be made, but they shouldn't be made at the cost of somebody who, when they bought their property, it was zoned for a reason that way. And I really do believe that it was probably zoned not mixed use for a reason, even though I know in the other meeting he said that was not used in those. But there's a lot of doctors' offices back there and other things that are good for the budget too. And so even more of those would be good. I just think that putting another 100 people in a building might not be the best use of that property.
Hey, I want to also comment, and thank you, Mark, for that. I also want to comment, there are 2 more public meetings yet in October scheduled. So I think it's great Steve will connect with Chris, but please encourage folks to come to those meetings as well.
Okay.
All right, so let's see. Ed, did you want to weigh in again? Ed, you're on mute.
Oh, there we go. No, actually, it was just a holdover from when my wife was trying to get online.
Okay, great. Let's see. So I'm Nick/Lisa.
Oh, can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. I thought I was muted. I asked a question, and this was sort of a follow-up to Paula's question about what the plans are and what type of housing is coming in. And, the point was made that you can't really tell people through zoning what they can charge for rent. And, I understand that. So I guess the follow-up question, and maybe I missed this, but one question was, I didn't hear what the units per square foot proposal was, first of all. And then secondly, through zoning, I believe you can make minimum square footage per unit restrictions. And so I wondered whether that had been considered, because I think probably, everyone, the surrounding homeowners seem to have a consensus that we don't want a lot of high density. And the larger the minimum square footage requirements, that would sort of, accomplish that purpose to some degree if this is going to happen. So that was my question about the density of the housing, I guess, basically, that's going to potentially be allowed.
Chad, does our slide coming up address that?
Yeah,
Yeah,
it sure
I
does.
would suggest we continue with the presentation.
Exactly where I said it. So
Sorry, I thought maybe I missed it, not that it was still coming, so I apologize.
no, that's okay. I was letting conversation go, but we do have a few more slides. So go.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thanks, Marie. These are great comments. So again, thanks everybody for your input on this. But in terms of the public input we've had to date and through our public meetings as well as our survey, I want to also address one of the concerns brought up earlier on what uses will go on here if this moves forward, and the focus has to be office. So what had been allocated is a minimum of 10,000 square feet per acre of office, and that's actually lower than what's there now. So what we've heard is that density of office is reasonable. So think back to those 3 pictures that we showed you from Bridge Park to Grandview Yard and where this fits on that continuum. So what we've heard so far is that sort of density in office is reasonable for this part of town. We heard concern about apartments, and that's not unlike things we've already heard tonight. We did hear from folks that walkability is actually desired. It's an amenity to be able to walk to restaurants or shopping. And so some folks in the area said that walkability is important to them. The height of buildings, of course, is a major concern that we've heard tonight as well. So not increasing the existing height limit. So we heard that loud and clear, and make the maximum height lower as you approach the lakes. So that's that building height transition, and that's what those maps that you saw earlier showed. So other concerns we heard about noise, how sound travels across those ponds, especially from restaurants, potential restaurants. So we want to protect those lakes since they are such an important amenity to the neighborhood, with setbacks and that building height transition, keeping any sort of intense use like a restaurant far away, keeping service areas away. We already talked about the closing of Arlington Center Boulevard at the lakes. That's again not something we're proposing, but only if the neighborhood was in agreement that's something we should consider.
And again, that's not a zoning issue per se. So kind of keeping it to the task at hand, that's something that we can continue to talk about. But for this specific task, that's not part of the zoning process.
That's right, Steve. And that also applies to the last bullet, which states that the lakes both need maintenance. Those lakes are not owned by the city. They're not maintained by the city. So that's an issue that can be hopefully worked out between the private property owners along those lakes. So again, to answer one of the questions that came up earlier, what's going to be allowed there? Well, again, we have a draft here. It's nothing final, and we actually have 6 more public meetings. So 2 BZAP meetings, another public meeting in October, and then potentially 3 council meetings. So lots more public outreach. We've only just begun. So office is obviously our number 1 use that we want to see in this zone. Outpatient surgery centers like Ortho 1, research centers, obviously surface and structured parking, those are all permitted uses. So if and only if that 10,000 square feet per acre of office threshold is met, then there are what we call secondary permitted uses. So if National Church Residences or Goshen Enterprises comes in with a redevelopment plan, it's got to go through the public review process, but they have to meet a minimum of 10,000 square feet per acre of office in order to propose a secondary use like retail or restaurant or a coffee shop or senior housing. So NCR can't just do a tower. They have to do office as well and get us that mixed use, but you have to meet that 10,000 square foot office threshold. That's a critical piece of this. And then there are some conditional uses, which essentially means that it's sort of a pause, and there are more strict review criteria for something like a hospital or a restaurant or a drive-through or a church. So those are a different level of use that you have to meet certain criteria for. So in terms of what we're seeing for this site, what we see the market bringing, permitted uses that's primary, and then if they hit that threshold, you get secondary and then conditional.
Hey, Chad, if we
Yeah.
could, just for a second, Paul has his hand up. Paul, are you able to speak yet? I'm not seeing a mute or unmute button on you.
Am I unmuted now?
I hear you. Yes.
Okay. This is Paul. I literally am looking at the lake right now, sitting in my living room. So just a couple of thoughts. I appreciate all the comments from various people, but one of the reason why we're living in this house is because of the lake. We always wanted to live on a lake. This became available. We moved from Dayton to Columbus for family, but we looked for a place that was on a lake. So that's really important to us. We put a lot of money into the house to do that, new patio, and we sit out there every night we can, even eat dinner out there. So looking across, NCR has been a really good, I don't know, say steward of the lake as well as our association. They contribute to it, I think about half of it. So they've been really good. And at night, it's really quiet here. It's really nice. We don't hardly hear anything from Henderson Road. So those are all good things. And the traffic, there's only one way in here on Concord Village Drive off of Durker. And so the traffic back here is very light. So that's really, really nice. And I think that contributes to safety as well as having a lake right behind us. I think the safety is really, really a good thing back here. As far as height, from where I'm sitting right here, I can see just barely the top of the Hamilton Capitol building. So, if we start talking about anything like, closer to 150 feet or anything like that, it'd be kind of dominating looking right down here, right while we're sitting in our backyard, I guess I'm saying. So that's a concern there, but it's just a beautiful place here and we really appreciate what we've got. So, and we love the community. We love Upper Arlington as well.
So
anyway, go ahead.
Marie, can I make a really honest comment, which is that I'm getting really jealous as I'm sitting here still in the office of all you people that are sitting outside on your porches tonight. And we've still got, I've got a city council meeting after this. So I just want to let you guys all know you're making it sound really, really good. And I'm really, really jealous at this point. So I do appreciate those of you who are have figured out the way to be able to do one of these from home sitting on your back porch. So kudos to you for doing that. But Paul, thanks for the comments. And I was just sitting here thinking, man, that sounds a lot better place to do this than still sitting in the office. So thanks for the comments.
And I appreciate we received, someone was asking how to follow up this meeting with additional questions or comments. And so I'm going to repeat that. It's going to be on the last slide, but I will read it to you again right now. It's planning@uaoh.net. So it will be on our last slide. So if you go online and see this posted later, you'll also be able to get that email there. And then there's some comments about if you can't dictate rent through zoning, which of course this person understands, is there a minimum square footage per unit you could do? And this comment suggested that they'd like to see those as high as possible. And
so I can answer that a little. My experience, and I get where you're going with that. My experience has been if it's a senior living facility, the unit size is the same, whether the unit is a income restricted unit or a non-income restricted unit. I'm in the process of, not in Columbus, but in Cincinnati, of moving my parents into a facility. And the units, when you talk about senior living, unit size doesn't really drive that as much as anything else. It all tends to be fit, finish, and services. And yeah, that's the very practical answer on that. Chad, I do believe that we can regulate unit size. But when you talk about senior, it's a little different. And that's kind of one of the nuances of stuff.
Agreed.
I have a quick question.
Sure. And your name, is that who's speaking?
This is Elaine.
Okay, hi Elaine.
Just a quick question. At this point in time, the parcels that National Church residences own are all zoned office only. There's no residence, correct?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
All right, Chad, I'm going to have you go to your next slide.
Okay, so as part of any zoning district, you have what are called development standards, and that basically goes through a series of limitations for the property. So, for example, height and setbacks are some of those standards, but there's some additional ones. And as we gather input and draft this code, here's where we are right now. Keeping the minimum 20% green space, keeping the minimum parking standards to ensure we don't have overflow. In terms of residential density, we showed some comparable densities in those 3 projects from Bridge Park down to Grandview Yard, but what we're showing is 35 units to the acre. We have increased the side and rear yard setbacks as compared to the current zoning in response to what we've heard. We also heard that, we don't want restaurant noise or service areas. So limiting those hours of operation to 10 p.m. is something we can do as part of the zoning. And then of course, the building height. The maximum height of 76 feet will remain the same for those properties in the dark purple closer to Henderson Road, and then stepping down to 64 once you get to North Bank Drive. And a final comment on this slide is, should anyone come in with a proposal, there is a public review process that goes to the Board of Zoning and Planning, where there are opportunities for public comment and public testimony. So that's important, and that process is not going to change.
So, and I do want to note, by the way, Alyssa, earlier I should have introduced you as one of the team. Alyssa Kelly is one of our great planners. So thank you for your patience with me, Alyssa. And so the upcoming engagement that we talked about, there is the first BZAP work session. And so that's when the city introduces what they've heard so far and what they are proposing at this point. That is Wednesday. The next public meeting, where it'll be structured very similar to this, will be 5 p.m. October 17th via Zoom. So if there's any reason that you're not able to get an association meeting planned before then, we encourage you to share this with your friends and encourage them to come. There will be a recommendation vote by BZAP on October 19th. Again, we'll continue to share how the conversation is going at that meeting. And then there are city council meetings, November 7th, 14th, and 21st. So let's go to the next, the next slide is just a kind of a placeholder slide, and then we will close with the email address. I still see Nick and Paul's hands up, and I'm looking to see Steve. Steve, we've not heard from you. Could we, and I'm assuming that's not Steve Shoney. So
can you hear me?
Yes.
Great, thank you. So yeah, Steve Rayo, I live right on the lake on the corner. I live right next to Paul. He's my fishing buddy.
Nice.
So I live right next to him with the pool on our yard. So 2 things you've mentioned. Number 1, noise. If there's no noise barriers going up, you can hear everything. I can hear what's going on in the parking lot over there. I can hear the leaf blowers when they lift the trash can to be dumped. It just travels. we don't have to get into the physics on how sound goes across water, but it's amplified. So if there are, so hold on to that thought for a minute. So you're saying 35 units per acre. What's in your game plan? What's your thought? How many total units, apartment units, condos, whatever they're going to be, is in the dream plan for y'all? And don't tell me you haven't done this.
So we're trying to figure, I mean, it's complicated math because there's 3 or 4 things you got to fit in there. Because you got to fit parking. You got to fit 10,000 square feet of office.
Understood.
And you got the height.
Right.
So to be honest with you, we have not done that math to figure out what is 35 units per acre plus 10,000 square feet per acre plus the parking to absorb that. If you do structured, if you don't do structured, how does all that lay out across? Oh, and by the way, you've got to have your setbacks and your 20% green space. We have not done that math.
So you're telling, again, so what you're telling me is you're going to go for zoning, and you have no idea what your income's going to be.
No, that's not true. So we know what the income's going to be off the 10,000 square feet. So do we know how an architect is going to lay out those 4, 5, whatever it was, factors that go into how to lay out a site? We don't. And we've got some tools that the next thing we're going to do is work through the implications of putting all these things together into the tools. So that's the next part in the process, is going through this. We didn't want to do that until we had kind of had the time to sit down and understand from the community what were the priorities that were going to happen for you guys. How does this work? And then all the other thing to come back to is, we do have to be careful about, how much buildable volume can we take from the existing property rights that are there under the current zoning before we start kind of triggering some challenges. So the challenge for us on this, to get back to one of the earlier questions, is do you do the zoning in advance or do you wait for a project to come? And there's not always a right answers to that. Our preference is always to do the zoning in advance so that there's as much time as possible for the market to adjust to that reality and to that kind of overall vision of things. But sure, do I wish that we had the ability to say, here's what exactly we think is going to come? No, we don't have that ability, but we're going through the math. And part of why we've said, and I should have used this line earlier tonight, the reason we're focused on understanding what your priorities are is because once we understand what those priorities are, we can try and figure out what the alternative possible solutions are. And that's kind of the next step in the research process for us as we're going through this, in addition to continuing to receive feedback. So yeah.
Hey,
I'll just add to that, Steve. So when we're looking at the kind of density numbers in a lot of our planned mixed use areas, there's usually a minimum density, because as Steve noted, there are those other built-in limitations: parking, green space, height. And so in this case, what we had heard from you all in the last couple meetings was that we want to know what that finite limit is. And that is where we came up with 35 units per acre, looking at kind of comparable mixed use districts in Central Ohio and elsewhere. That's where we came up with that maximum in this case, as opposed to doing a minimum. We want to know what that upper threshold could be.
Thanks, Alyssa. And I want to share just a couple more comments and questions that were posted. And one comment was, the market may be changing because of COVID. Will more people be working from home? And how does that affect the commercial market And have you done any studies on that? So do you have any response to that?
Yeah, that one I've got to, I'll try and be as brief as I can on this, because this is one of my favorite things to talk about. This is frankly why we started this, is because office areas like this will fail over the next 5, 10, 15 years, unless you do something to make them vibrant. Where you've got buildings that have reached their functional obsolescence. You know, it used to be that a building, like if National Church was to go out of those buildings, it used to be you would backfill that kind of stuff with a call center, which nobody, like, again, that's one of the bottom 3 things that, people say, hey, I really want a call center in my buildings in my upscale suburb. Today, I don't know what fills that space if that goes dark. Under the current zoning, I really have no idea what fills that space. I don't know what the market for that is. And that's a real risk for us. So we have to start thinking ahead. That's part of why we've gotten this. The office that works today tends to be office that is part of a mixed use development, where it's an environment that people can get things other than work done during their day. So, and that's those kind of mixed use environments where you can you can go to your office, you can live very close to your office. You've got people around, you've got enough volume in the area that you're able to generate, enough people in the area that you can start to attract restaurants and things like that. Not a ton, and you don't need a ton of it, but you need something that gives you more than just, frankly, what's back there today.
Thank you, Steve. So as you can see, there are, and we have additional comments that I think are kind of repeating some of the things we've heard earlier, and concerns about noise. And can you do some more no parking on both sides of Stonehaven, as far south as Northwest Park? But I think that's the one question maybe we haven't addressed yet that this team here hasn't heard. What are the parking rules? Can you consider no parking on both sides of Stonehaven?
Yeah, so certainly we can always look at parking restriction changes. What we try to do is obviously around curves and stuff, we limit parking where there's sight distance issues. And the approach we've kind of taken citywide is to allow parking on one side of the street for residents that live in those areas, so that if they have guests over, or they're having something at their home, they have area for parking. But if there's certain site distant restrictions, we can look at those as well.
Great, thank you, Jackie. All right, so as you see, there is this email address. There were a couple of questions that we got kind of offline that said, hey, I have another issue. Who would I talk to about that? People are checking that planning@uaoh.net email. So please don't be shy about emailing any issue or question there. And then let's see, Steve, do you want to say any more remarks before we're beginning to lose people anyway? So I thought we would just wrap up at this point.
Yeah, first of all, thank you. McGovern's already reached out to try and find some dates. So Chris is on it. So we'll continue this discussion. I know for the folks south of the lake, that's great. I know there was a kind of core of folks from Stonehaven and that area, Chevy Chase. Again, we've said before that if anybody wants to come in and have a chance to sit down with me or members of the team, happy to do it. This is really big stuff, really complicated stuff. And it's, sometimes it's easier just to understand where we are by sitting down face to face, certainly happy to do that.
Well, thank you, Steve. And I will echo my thank you to everybody for participating. And thanks to the great team with Upper Arlington, who really, I can just say, they are authentically listening to everything you have to say. So we really appreciate hearing what those thoughts are. So with that, I am going to adjourn and hope you all have a wonderful evening and enjoy that lakeside evening. You're making me jealous. Okay. Good night, everybody.